Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack a brilliant text that finally puts a name to that frustrating, nagging feeling you probably have about your workplace. You know the exact feeling I'm talking about, right? It's that moment you look around and absolutely nothing seems to make actual sense on the ground, even though the paperwork insists everything is just fine.
Let's jump right in with a quote from our source that literally sets the perfect stage for this whole discussion. It goes like this: "We have built a world that rewards the appearance of competence over its practice." I mean, let that sink in for a second. We're talking about an entire system that cares way more about looking like things are working than actually putting in the sweat to make sure they do.
So I gotta ask you directly, why does your workplace feel so completely disconnected from reality? If you've ever felt like you're just drowning in corporate bureaucracy, or you're filling out forms that literally nobody reads, or you're chasing these totally arbitrary targets that somehow make your actual job so much harder, well, let me reassure you, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to use this incredible text to solve the mystery of exactly why organizations prioritize these compliance metrics over reality, and more importantly, what we can actually do about it.
So let's start by looking at this illusion of competence.
To really understand the problem here, we first need to look at the elaborate illusion organizations build to mask what's actually happening behind the scenes. The source material brilliantly calls this the loud architecture of performance. And man, is it loud. We're talking about the endless, deafening noise of compliance reporting, the frantic pace of transactional management, the sheer suffocating volume of metrics, and of course, policies that exist for no other reason than to literally fill up filing cabinets. It's just a relentless barrage of noise. And the whole reason for it, the sheer volume of this managed work, is specifically designed to drown out the actual meaningful work you're trying to do every day.
And that brings us to a really massive dichotomy. On one side, you've got this managed truth, the pristine, liability-edited, official version of events that just sits neatly in a file somewhere. But then, on the other side, you have the actual truth, the messy, physical reality happening on the warehouse floor, or in the hospital ward, or the classroom. There is a massive and honestly often dangerous gap between what leadership records in their official files and what is physically happening out there in the real world.
Which leads us to ask about the true cost of that actual truth.
Why do organizations almost universally choose the managed truth over reality? Well, the answer from our source is surprisingly simple, but man, it is heavy. Truth is expensive. It costs time, it costs vulnerability, and perhaps most importantly, it triggers the operational terror of discovering that your official version of events is completely, entirely wrong. I really want to emphasize this point because it's absolutely crucial. The actual truth isn't ignored by accident, not at all. It's actively avoided because the terror of confronting physical reality is just way too expensive for management to handle.
Now, what's super fascinating is how organizations cleverly brand this avoidance. They basically erase the truth and then falsely label it, get this, efficiency. But as our source points out, the real definition of corporate efficiency is just the slow accumulation of unexamined problems. Kind of ironic, right? They aren't actually being efficient at all. They're literally just hoarding problems and sweeping them under neatly formatted spreadsheets, just crossing their fingers and hoping nobody checks the math.
But here's the real danger. Those suppressed problems? Yeah, they don't just magically disappear. They silently compound over time, slowly morphing into these massive, completely unavoidable crises. And what's truly heartbreaking about all this is that these are crises that could have been completely prevented by just one honest conversation, or, one genuine investigation. When we prioritize managing our liability over understanding reality, the system doesn't just stagnate. It begins to experience deep, systemic decay.
And that decay creates something we can call the black hole effect.
Let's look at how this systemic decay actually plays out in scenarios you've probably experienced firsthand. Take healthcare, for example. The managed metric measures recovery in tight 15-minute appointment slots, completely ignoring the reality that human healing takes actual time. Or look at education. Learning is measured by rigid standardized test scores, completely missing true cognitive and human development. And what about the corporate world? Oh, we have the famous productive meeting. You know the exact one I mean. Everyone in the room knows what the real problem is, but the conversation just orbits the core issue like a black hole, never actually crossing the event horizon, all just to manage liability. Everyone walks out saying, well, okay, that was a productive meeting, while the actual core issue just grows silently heavier in the center of the room.
But thankfully, there are people who see right through this facade. Our source material identifies them, and I really like to call them the gap noticers. These are the everyday people, honestly, the real heroes of our explainer today. They're the ones who see the massive, glaring disconnect between the official paperwork and the physical reality on the ground. They are the ones actually noticing that the system is deteriorating right in front of them.
So who actually pays the price for noticing this truth? Well, it's the auditor who insists on asking those really uncomfortable questions. It's the driver who flat out refuses to operate a vehicle that looks fine on paper but is physically unsafe. It's the teacher who tosses out the mandated script so they can actually reach a struggling student. Just picture that moment in a meeting when someone finally raises their hand and demands to look at what actually happened. When these folks speak up, you can practically feel 30 faces in the room instantly soften with relief, while the one person with authority just stiffens with absolute dread.
And I want to pause on this really incredible quote for a second. These people are not troublemakers. They are simply the ones still willing to pay the cost of truth. So listen, if you're the one at your job asking those uncomfortable questions or pointing out that the shiny metrics don't match the messy reality of the work, take a deep breath. You are not the problem. You are just seeking the truth in a system that was fundamentally, structurally designed to avoid it.
So, you've got to wonder, why does leadership let this happen?
Well, actually, scratch that. It's not because they lack intelligence or data. The root cause here is that they are actively optimizing for the immediate. They're focused on the quarterly figures, the liability reports, the daily performance metrics. Seeing the big picture, that requires distance. It requires patience. It requires an ability to just sit with complex problems. Instead of asking the really vital question, which is, what does this build? They are heavily incentivized by the system to only ever ask, what does this cost? They aren't malicious. They're just trapped by the very incentives they've built.
Okay, so how do we actually find reality again?
How do we fix this? Let's pivot from the problem to some highly actionable solutions presented in the text, ways to actually reverse this systemic decay. Now, the very first step requires something incredibly difficult for any management team, giving up control. Step 1 is simply to stop auditing yourselves. Why? Because internal reviews will always, without fail, default to liability management. Step 2, you've got to separate the investigation of reality from the chain of command. And Step 3, bring in outside eyes. Unions, independent bodies, genuinely neutral advocates to check the actual floor. You don't ask them if the policy is legally compliant. No, you ask them if the policy is actually keeping people safe in physical reality.
Now let's bring modern tools into this reckoning, because this part is fascinating. Our source makes a brilliant point. Artificial intelligence is a mirror of the intent behind it. Think about that. The technology itself isn't some magical cure for systemic decay. It's literally just a mirror. It all comes down to the underlying intent of how leadership actually chooses to apply it.
Organizations are facing a pretty stark choice with this technology right now. On one hand, they can choose to multiply the disease. That means using AI simply to monitor and penalize employees based on rigid, already broken policies, basically just automating the volume of the problem. Or on the other hand, they can choose the path of the truth-seeking tool. If leadership has the courage to use AI as an independent external lens to audit the system itself, to find the actual gaps between what is written and what is lived, well, then it becomes an unprecedented, incredibly powerful tool for discovering reality.
We can absolutely still choose a different model. The source leaves us with this powerful, honestly empowering directive. Turn the volume down, look at what is actually happening, and be willing to pay for what you find. We have got to look past the endless, suffocating noise of metrics and bravely embrace physical reality, even when that reality is completely terrifying to confront.
Which leads us to our final takeaway. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this profound final question from our source material. Moving forward, instead of organizations constantly just asking, how much did we save, we need to demand that they ask, what did we build, who did we develop, and what truth did we find? I really encourage you to rethink exactly what your organization is prioritizing right now. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep looking for the truth out there.